The end of 1940 sees the United Kingdom bankrupted by the war. FDR changes from the cash and carry, you have to pay up front and carry on your own ships, to the Lend-Lease program. He uses the analogy of a garden hose. He says if your neighbor's house catches on fire, and you have a hose that would help him put it out, and he comes to you and says, I need your hose, you don't say, I'll sell you this hose for $20. You let him use the hose, and when he's done, he gives you the hose back. And he says this about the military supplies that Britain needs to fight the war. Now, it's a little bit of a silly analogy, because we're not going to get those tanks and planes back, but the American people tend to generally accept it. This is one of his most famous fireside chats. The Lend-Lease Act passes easily in 1941, and it allows for us to give equipment to England on the promise they'll either give the equipment back or pay us back later. But the goods can't get to the United Kingdom because German marine submarines have basically shut down the Atlantic Ocean to Allied shipping. FDR then argues that the Atlantic Ocean is a neutral zone, and even if whether we're in the war or not, we have the right to defend our shipping. And we launched the Merchant Marine to fight the submarines. America will patrol the Atlantic as far as Iceland with armed merchant boats. This is not the Navy. And the first Americans to really get active in the war in a big number are these people who volunteer to fight the submarines on the Merchant Marines. And early on, many Americans believed, like we did in World War I, that we could limit our role in the war to assisting in maritime combat. In September of 1941, Hitler stabbed Stalin in the back. What a surprise, right? They had signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, and Hitler, having conquered most of Western Europe with the exception of Britain, and of course the neutral countries and those on his side, will invade the Soviet Union, which had been his plan all along. The Soviets fight back in brutal, just horrific combat. The Soviets, when they fought, well, I'll get to that in the next chapter. FDR extends the Lend-Lease Act to the Soviets, which is amazing to think about it in today's world. We are now arming allies on both fronts and fighting the German submarines. Hitler begins attacking American ships, and Americans began to talk seriously about whether we should join the war directly. In October of 1941, 2 U.S. destroyers are attacked, and the Reuben James is sunk. The U.S. then arms merchant vessels, and we are effectively in a naval war against Germany, and this is a few months before Pearl Harbor. In August of 1941, Roosevelt and Churchill meet on a boat in the Atlantic, and they sign the Atlantic Charter, and Roosevelt commits America to the final destruction of Nazi tyranny, although this has not taken the shape of putting units on the ground to fight the war. Japan has expanded in the Pacific. The Tripartite Pact of September 1940 sees Germany, Italy, and Japan all join into a loose alliance, although the European powers never really helped the Japanese. In June of 1941, Japan invades Indochina, as you see on the map there, taking Vietnam and much of Southeast Asia. We break the Japanese codes. One of the things we were actually pretty good at during the war was listening in on the Japanese conversations. And we warn them that if they invade the Dutch East Indies, which are an island chain in the Pacific, we will freeze all their assets in the United States. When they invade the Dutch East Indies, we in fact do that, and Japan begins to see us as an enemy. They have two choices. They can make nice with us, or they can find new resources. Because we've frozen a lot of their assets and they're having a problem getting things like oil, they attack British and French holdings in Asia that are rich in oil. General Tojo, the head of the war party in Japan, is elected the new prime minister, and FDR abandons any hope of peace with Japan. Intelligence tells us they plan to attack us, but we don't know when and we don't know where. And so, yes, we knew the Japanese were planning to attack us. We just didn't know it would be Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. At 7:55 in the morning on a Sunday morning, the Japanese come in with their airplanes. They sink 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 4 other smaller ships. They destroy 188 planes and many buildings at the base in Pearl Harbor. 24,000 are killed and 1,000 are wounded in the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese, of course, lose almost no one. But we got incredibly lucky at Pearl Harbor. because our carriers weren't there. Our aircraft carriers, the big boats that carry the planes, they were out on maneuvers. And so even after Pearl Harbor, we still have them. And fortunately for America, and I would say the world, the aircraft carrier will turn out to be the single most vital piece of equipment in the war against Japan. FDR, of course, responds in a speech calling for war against the Japanese. On December 8th of 1941, FDR gives this speech.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Senate votes for war against Japan unanimously, and the House of Representatives votes 388 to 1, the lone vote being Jeannette Rankin, the first woman in Congress who had also voted against World War I. On December 11th of 1941, Germany and Italy also declare war on America as part of their treaty with Japan, and we are now fully in the war.